So welcome to tonight's webinar. My name's Ian McFarland and I'm one of the Sheep Connect SA team members. So tonight's webinar is brought to you by Sheep Connect SA, which is supported by the Australian Wool Innovation, SA Sheep Industry Fund and Department of Primary Industries and Regions. For more information on Sheep Connect, please have a look at our website or follow us on Twitter. Our tonight's speaker is Geoff Duddy from Sheep Solutions. Geoff was born in central New South Wales and he currently runs a consultancy business, Sheep Solutions, which he started in 2013. He spent 27 years with the New South Wales DPI in both sheep and wool research and extension, and is now based in southern Queensland. Geoff runs a number of accredited programs like Fedwell, Making More from Sheep, Ram Select and Lifetime U. So at this time, I'll hand over to Geoff and who'll tell us all about ASBVs.
Yeah, thanks Ian and welcome everyone. Appreciate the chance to actually address South Australia. I've never actually done much work in South Australia when I was with New South Wales DPI, but you've always had a swag of extension and consultants over there. Yeah, tonight we're going to look at ASBVs, Australian Sheep Breeding Values, and basically how to use the numbers to improve your bottom line, particularly to match your breeding objectives. Now, what are ASBVs? An animal's breeding value, it's genetic merit, half of which is passed on to its progeny. So we've just got to be mindful of that when we're looking at these values that we'll go through. The appearance and performance of an animal is a combination of its genes and the environment in which it is raised. And the Australian sheep breeding values are generated from pedigree and performance data of the size, progeny and family. So what influences an animal's performance? Most people would accept that feed is a major factor when it comes to how an animal is going to perform. Put simply though, if you've got good genetics and you've got good feed, you'll get good performance. Other factors include the age of the animal, whether it was born as a single or a twin or even a triplet, the age of the dam. That's important because of the maternal input, if you like. Lambs from maiden ewes who've never been through lambing before and haven't had the full udder development and milk production are generally behind lambs from mature age ewes, for example. So they need to take that into account. Any disease or parasite issues can also affect performance, but what we're going to talk about tonight is the effect and the importance of looking at the genes. I took this photo at a Ram Select workshop that I did with Murray Long, another consultant in New South Wales, a few years ago, and most people, if they went to a ram sale, would probably buy the ram at the back. Industry have gone very much into fast growth rates, and that unfortunately also pushes us into larger framed and heavier animals. And we've got fairly big with that. But if we looked at the actual ASBV values of those two rams, the little fellow at the front was actually born as a triplet and reared as a triplet. But he's got exactly the same ASBV values for weaning weight, fat and eye muscle as the single born ram. So if you went to a sale, you'd probably buy that ram at the front for $500 less, but you'd be buying exactly the same genetics. So what are ASBVs? They're raw measurements that are adjusted for differences in environment, things like the birth date and the type, whether they're a single or twin, the dam's age, the sex of the animal, and also management groups. They try to take a lot of this background noise out by taking into account a lot of the information provided by the studs and how the animals are managed. The aim of the whole thing is to determine how the progeny would perform if they were all born as singles on the same day and raised in exactly the same way. So they're trying to take out all this background environmental influence. With climate change or variability, heat stress is likely to have an increasingly greater impact on fertility in embryo and lamb survival, on our feed values, pasture-based values and availability, and also growth rates due to appetite suppression. But ASBVs can assist producers, particularly in pastoral areas, to improve production efficiencies, improve profit margins, and to help mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. They are a tool, and I guess I should really reinforce that they're not the be-all and end-all. They're a tool. They're a management tool that you can use to help fine-tune your breeding program. If we select on carcass traits, we're looking here at things like growth rate, fat, eye muscle. We can look at increasing lamb birth weight, lamb survival, lamb growth rates, reduce the time of sale or turn off a stock for sale, have the ewe progeny reach mature weights earlier. Anyone particularly interested in joining ewe lambs, I think that's something they should look seriously at with respect to selecting for growth rates. Increased joining and conception rates, improved dressing percentages, improved feed conversion efficiencies, and ultimately look at producing more resilient breeding ewes and progeny. To maximise the benefits when you're using Australian sheep breeding values, you should have a clear, measurable breeding objective. Know where you're heading and how much emphasis do you want to put on things like growth or those carcass traits, or if you're a merino enterprise or a wool enterprise of some sort, whether or not you want to put more emphasis on wool cut or quality. You need to know your primary profit drivers. And we'll go through a list of the main ones in a second. You want to place emphasis on those traits that are important to your breeding and production objectives, your targeted markets, and the environment that you're in. As I mentioned before, you need to, or you can use ASBVs as a tool. You still need to select your replacement size on both structural and how they suit your breeding objective in terms, again, if you're a wool-based enterprise, in terms of wool quality in particular. So what are your primary profit drivers? We normally ask this in bred well, fed well programs. Most will quote things like wool price, wool cut, sheep meat prices, weaning percent, kilogram of product produced per hectare or DC or per ewe or per 100 millimetres of rainfall, and or the cost of production. The main one there really is weaning percent. And principally because even if you are a self-replacing merino wool operation, the majority of your income is coming from sheep meat side. This is a graph that of gross margins that I've been doing since 2007 that looks at the percentage share of income from the sheep meat side. And that's like your sale lambs, your slaughter lambs, cull animals, even your mutton component. And if you look there at the moment, the self-replacing merino enterprise, and that is around about an 18.5 micron enterprise selling the weather portion, the weather lamb portion as store lambs, is close enough to 60% of the income is coming from the sheep meat side. I'm not saying wool's not important. It's still a big component of a wool-based enterprise, obviously, but the sheep meat is really riding a crest of a wave, has done for 5 to 10 years, and we really can't see it stopping. So what are ASBVs? The traits are expressed as an abbreviation of the trait name. So if you're selecting for weight, WT is the abbreviation, eye muscle depth, EMD, clean fleece weight, CFW. It's important that, and we're going to look at what's called a percentile table as we go through, and I'll walk you through on how to read that. But the trait ASBVs are based around 0, and that's the baseline that represented where the traits were back in 1990 for the terminals, and back to the year 2000 for the merino and Dooney databases. And all these databases are managed by Sheep Genetics Australia. The ASBVs are expressed as either as either positive or negative deviations from an average, and negative ASBVs are not always bad. For example, negative fibre diameter ASBV means you're selecting for a finer animal. A negative WEC or worm egg count ASBV, the more negative, the better it is for the progeny, because they're actually more resilient to a worm burden. So what traits are available? I'm not going to go through all these, but basically I've broken them into carcass or reproduction traits on the left-hand side there, and fleece and worm ASBVs that you can actually use and select. I think it's important, and it's something we take people through with Bred Well, Fed Well programs, a practical session, not to select or put too much emphasis on too many traits. 3 to 4 traits is probably the ideal. If you spread across too many traits, too many ASBVs, it takes a while to actually get to where you want it. Couple of slides that Sheep Genetics Australia have been able to give me. And this is going back to the year 2010, just to show you what's happening with the databases. If you're looking at that graph in front of us, back in 2010 to 2019, the yearling weight in the Merino database has increased on average by about 2.4 kilos. So that's the weight of the animal at 12 months of age. The yearling clean fleece weight, and this is in a percentage basis, has increased almost 9% in that same period. When we look at the terms, the prefix for the trait abbreviations, you see there on the screen. B relates to birth, W for weaning, P for post-weaning, and so on. So if you're looking to understand what the traits mean, BWT relates to birth weight, PFAT is post-weaning fat depth, and so on. In terms of the percentile bands that you can download from Sheep Genetics Australia's website, they show the range of these ASBVs across all animals in the current year's drop. This allows you to see where the animal ranks for that trait within the breed or the analysis group. For example, if an animal's trait ASBV is in the 1 percentile band, it is one of the highest performing animals for that trait in the database. And if it's in the 50 percentile band, it's average or median for that trait. So it's basically in the center. If you understand what a bell-shaped curve is, it's basically right bang smack on the top of that. I like to think of it as an average values for animals in the database. So this is what a percentile table looks like. There's a lot of information on that. I'm just going to step you through it. What you want to do, and this is an example for a merino, the merino database. And I will say that all merinos that are tested under the Merino Select program are in this database. So every single animal from ultrafines right through to the broader type wools are all on the one database. You want to look at trying to get the most recent analysis. The most recent one has actually just come out in August. So, but they don't change a great deal, the values or the positions of these at all. You want to make sure you have if you're doing the merino percentile band, the Australian Sheep Breeding Values logo that shows that these are supported and analysed by Sheep Genetics Australia. We have a list of the ASBV traits at the top. Just going left to right, yearling fibre diameter, yearling clean fleece weight, and so on, right across to yearling eye muscle depth. So these all relate to animals at 12 months of age. We have the bands down this left-hand side, and this is where we talk about the percentile band levels, going from 0 or 1% right down to 100. This is the 50 percentile or the average or median values of merinos that are all in the database in Australia. As I mentioned, 0 is when the databases basically relate back to, and then on the merinos and Doonies, 0 relates back to the values back in the year 2000, so 21 years ago. This is where all these traits actually stood back in the year 2000. So anything above that is basically an improvement on those traits in that time. Indexes, I'm not going to spend much time on indexes. I like to refer to those as basically a headline. We'll talk a little bit about what they are, but what I'd like you to really take home from tonight is that you should select on individual ASBV values and not just rely on indexes, and I'll show you why in a second. What an index is, it combines all the ASBV traits into one value. It's available to suit a range of different breeding programs. It's basically a quick selection guide to try and narrow down the size you want to look at if you go to an auction. And as I said, while they're useful tools, it's important to always consider individual trait ASBV values. I'll explain why now. We want to see if these two rams suit your breeding objective. On the index, dual purpose index range, they both have a value of 141. So they're both down where it's circled there. We have a green and a red tag rams, and they're the individual ASBV values for the 5 traits we're going to look at. There's our 50 percentile or average for merinos in this database. For our green ram, he's minus 1.3 for fibre diameter, so he's on the finer side. He's a little bit below the industry average for clean fleece weight, so he won't cut as much as a lot of other rams in the database. He's above average there for yearling weight or growth rate, about average for fat, and right bang on average for eye muscle. Our other ram, he's down here, he's not as fine, if you like, so he's a little bit, he's probably going to be a little bit stronger in the wool. He's a cracker when it comes to yearling clean fleece weight. He's right up in the top 15-20% of rams in Australia. And for the yearling weight and fat and eye muscle values, he's around about the same as the green one. So if you were selecting these rams and you wanted to put more emphasis on yearling clean fleece weight, our red ram may well be the one you want to go for. We have also what's called correlated traits, where if you select for a particular trait, it may result in changes in other traits. So it's referred to as a genetic correlation. They can be both positive or negative. If the correlation is positive, then there's an improvement in both traits. If the correlation is negative, one trait shows improvement and the other one may deteriorate. I've just got a list here, and Murray Long put this together again when we're doing Ram Select workshops throughout eastern states a few years ago. So we're looking here at the traits that are in blue are basically a free kick. The traits in red, you could refer to it as a penalty, a 50-metre penalty. So if you select for growth rate, you'll select for leanness in the animal, reproduction, lean meat yield and fleece weight, for example, but you may well reduce meat eating quality. You could blow out your fibre diameter. You could lead to heavier lambs at birth. That might well lead to dystocia or birthing problems. Fat, you've got positives and negatives, same with the muscle. What I like about each of those is they all have positive influence on reproduction. So if you put some emphasis on growth, fat and muscle in a merino enterprise, you're going to get a couple of free kicks there when it comes to reproduction. Do they work? The short answer is yes. You can actually look at a summary of what they call proof of profit research and on-farm trials that are listed on the Sheep Genetics Australia website. Actual outcomes generally exceed the predicted or expected outcomes, and that's a real plus. I just want to take you through one particular example which I've always used, and it's a trial run by producers on farm at Glen Innes. And what they wanted to look at, they wanted to look at the difference in value of lambs side by rams with post-weaning weight or growth breeding values in the top 10% versus industry average or that 50 percentile. Okay, so post-weaning weight is basically lambs at 7.5 months of age. So what they did, they had high post-weaning weight and average post-weaning weight. They tried to keep these other ASBVs, particularly fat and eye muscle, as close as possible. So they didn't have much of an influence on the trial. The major factor influencing the results were these growth post-weaning weight traits here. So 14.2 for the high post-weaning weight animals, 7.7 average for the average animal back in 2010. Interestingly, this is how much the industry changes. Current industry average for terminal size, or the 50 percentile value, is actually now 14.3. So in 10 years, rams that were 10 years ago in the top 10% for growth rate in Australia are now industry average. The expected response, remember I said that only half the genetics are passed on. So what we need to do is we look at the difference between these two, these traits, this growth rate trait. So it's 14.2 minus 7.7. So it's 6.5 kilos. But because the ram is only giving half the genetics, we divide that by 2. So the expected response would be an additional 3.25 kilos for lambs sired by these high post-weaning weight rams. The results basically were, when they took them out to this 6-7 months of age, there was around about a 5 kilo difference. And if you remember, the expected response was 3.25 kilo. The actual response was 5.1. So lambs, again, when they were slaughtered, the time of slaughter, the lambs that were sired by fast-growing rams were 5 kilos heavier. All these lambs were run under the same conditions and pasture base up until the point of slaughter. So this all happened back in 2010. Hogan's averaged about 2.5 kilos extra carcass weight, so quite a good dress percent, 48%. At the time when they sold these lambs in 2011, it's when we had the price peak and record price back then at $6.20. So that meant each lamb sired by those high-performing rams returned an additional $15.50 for no other reason other than the genetics that they got from Dad. Hogan's averaged 100 lambs per ram, so each ram returned an additional $1,550 in its first joining, in its first year, compared to the average ram. If we say, okay, you'll average 70 lambs per ram per joining, you sell them for $7.50, so you're going to generate an extra $1,300 odd in 1 year, or over 4 years, an extra $5,250 per ram, compared to above a ram who was on the 50 percentile values, or an average ram in Australia. So good genetics pays. So that was terminals. It's interesting, this is some work done in WA, exactly the same order, except it was with merinos. The one outstanding ram was this one down this right-hand side, which by all accounts was the only ram that was physically different, that you could actually pick was different. And that is a really strong relationship there. So rams that have sired lambs and they're higher in post-weaning weight, their lambs made a slaughter weight earlier or were heavier at slaughter. This is some work that Nick Linden from Victorian Department undertook a few years ago, where he had a variety of rams with post-weaning weight values. And we're going here from around about 4 kilos post-weaning weight up to 15 kilos or so. And he fed these lambs in a shedded operation. He knew exactly what each lamb ate and their performance. And on a feed conversion base, the higher the growth potential of the lambs, the better the feed conversion. So that translates through, if we're looking at breeding more resilient ewes, we put a bit more emphasis on growth rate. We're actually, through default, going to improve feed conversion and their efficiencies. This is some work that was done by Mark Murphy up here in Queensland. He's a stud producer. He wanted to look at the impact of fat and eye muscle, ASBVs, on weaning percent. So he had a variety of rams. That's these rams that are listed down below here. this grey and orange lines you read on the right-hand axis, they are eye muscle and fat ASBV values. So rams at this end of the graph were high in eye muscle and fat ASBV. Rams down this end were quite low. And what he found across that whole range of ASBVs, a 20% difference in weaning percent. So what basically has happened is that rams have provided lambs with better energy reserves, right? Better fat and better eye muscle. And there were 2 rams that had the same WEC value, or worm egg count value. It was about minus 30%. But the weaning rates were again about, 20% different. So even though the ASBV value said that they should perform the same, the ram or ram A that had given better genetics, fat and eye muscle to its progeny, ended up having higher survival rates. In the year that he ran this trial, he had a big barber's pole burden. So more resilient lambs come out of those rams that gave them better genetics. So what's a ram worth? Size have a significant and extended impact on your system, particularly if you're self-replacing. They cost you little in terms of their cost per lamb produced compared to a ewe. I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you pay $1,500 for a ram that produces 70 lambs per joining, over 4 joinings, that works out at about $5.36 per live lamb. A ewe, so let's value her at $250. If she gives you 6 lambs over her lifetime, that works out at $41.67. So rams are cheap, and good quality genetics are cheap. Even last 12, 18 months, we've seen some really high prices across all breeds, and really high clearance rates. It's well worth looking at paying that extra for good quality genetics. It is possible to estimate a ram's value against an individual stud's average commercial ram price. Well, what I tend to do is estimate an average price for rams use their 50 percentile trait value. So the average ram in Australia, and we just need to come up with an average price and work from there. As I mentioned, look, it actually pays to pay for predicted performance. And I just want to run you through a program that Murray Long and I put together as part of the Ram Select workshops, and it's still being developed. But I just wanted to show you how I generate some graphs and some ram prices coming up. So anything in the white cells is where you add the information. So we put our ram percent, joining percent in here, expected weaning rates, the number of times the ram or the years of rams are going to be used. It'll generate and tell you how many lambs each ram will sire. Breaks it into ewe lambs, and I'm assuming we're retaining the ewe lambs, and it takes into account the number of times we shear them, whether lambs are going for slaughter in this particular case. So we enter that information. We then look at carcass weight and wool percent. This is where we put in here the 50 percentile value from the merino percentile value tables. Same here for the wool, that's clean fleece weight, 50 percentile value. And I'll just put in there a ram's value of 6.1 for yearling weight and 26.3% for clean fleece weight. It then goes through and we put in yields here for slaughter, and that's a clean fleece weight, saying it's clean fleece weight value for yield. We put in an expected carcass price, and also current wool price if you want to. It'll then generate from these values compared to the 50 percentile values, the additional income for slaughter lambs and also the wool side for that ram. You then put in, like we say, the average price of a ram is $1,000. Let's say a grade ram is what the 50 percentile band values are. And so the program will then go through and say your maximum that you can pay for this ram above paying $1,000 for a grade ram, you'd pay up to $1,792 more before you're as well off just buying a grade ram, because he has returned you $1,792 more than the the average ram. There's also a quick check in here for ASBVs where you can enter the rams information, the 50 percentile value information here, and then this quick check will actually say, okay, clean fleece weight, fibre diameter, yearling weight, yeah, they all match pretty well. Maybe we need to look at the fat, and in this case, number of lambs weaned, ASBV values. So it's just a quick check. So I've used that program to generate the information in these next couple of slides. This one is for merinos, and these graphs basically are saying how much extra you can pay above the $1,000 price you pay for an average ram. And I've given here $5.50, $6.50, $7.50 slaughter price values. The grey bars are rams that are in the top 15% for growth rate and for clean fleece weight. Orange bars are in the top 25%, and blue bars are the 35% for yielding growth rate and the clean fleece weight. Okay, more than likely we're going to receive somewhere around $6.50 for our slaughter merino lamb. So if you buy a ram that's in the top 15% for both growth and clean fleece weight, you can afford to pay an extra $2,800 above the $1,000 for an average ram. If you buy one that's in the 35 percentile range, you can afford to pay around about $1,700 more. So there's a difference there of over $1,100 between buying a ram from the 35 percentile versus the top 15%. So it's well and truly worth looking at paying for really good genetics. On the Dooney side, same process. In this case, I've actually, the merinos were cutting 5 kilos of wool. The Dooneys I've said are cut 3.5 and a little bit stronger. The merinos were $13.50 a kilo clean. Same process. You can afford to pay up to, say, $1,600 more for a ram that's in the top 15% for growth and clean fleece weight compared to the average ram. And for terminals, exactly the same thing. In this case, we're actually selling lambs at $7.50. We're only basing it on post-weaning weight or growth rate up to that 7.5 months of age, but there's exactly the same thing. So if you were to pay $1,000 for a ram that had ASBV values on that 50 percentile, you would pay another $1,700 on top of that $1,000, so up to $2,700 for a ram in the top 15% before you were better off just buying an average ram. So look, in summary, ASBVs are a tool. Right? So we just use them as a component of your whole breeding objective. But they can be used to improve lamb number and survival, lamb growth rates, feed conversion, carcass and wool incomes, and importantly, as we go forward, our breeding ewe efficiencies. The key, however, is balance. You need to identify what your primary profit drivers are, define your breeding goals, and use the ASBVs to meet both of those. As I mentioned before, don't try and put too much emphasis on too many traits. It really slows down the whole process. I think 3 to 4 traits, again, if you're a merino-based operation, carcass and wool traits, a balance between those is probably the way to go. Take-home messages: have a clear, measurable breeding objective. Select replacement size on both structural and genetic merit. Place emphasis on those traits that are important to your flock or herd breeding and production objectives. Importantly, your targeted markets and the environment that you're actually in and running these animals in. Tools and resources, and I'll provide a copy of this presentation to Sheep Connect that they can, producers can actually download. So with that, thank you and good luck with it all. We'll take some questions.
Thanks, Geoff. Yes, if anyone's got any questions, please type them in the Q&A box now. Geoff, we do have a couple of questions. So can studs influence the data submitted to sheep genetics? Is the data
Yep.
reliable?
Really good question. Look, the short answer is, if they do so, they get caught out. The linkages, and there's millions of data points in the database now. The linkages, well, certainly, if a stud wasn't doing the right thing and we're actually putting in incorrect readings, they will be found out because those animals just will not perform. It's certainly the case. For one reason or another, studs have bought animals or semen and not got anywhere near the response that animal should have given. So it's integrity. It's been running, and these performance sort of management programs have been running for 30 to 40 years. So with the numbers in the database, if you get found out in this industry, well, you get a bit of a black name pretty quick.
Thanks, Geoff. So how does Sheep Genetics test the data submitted?
You'll probably need to talk to someone from Sheep Genetics more attuned to that, to be honest. It really comes down to integrity, as I said. And because there are so many linkages and the like, it really is a really strong database. And as I said, it's been running for so long. And they do sort of really recognise when there's an outlier, and they do question it. Something that's excessively good. But yeah, look, because of the use of linkage size, all the trials and programs that are sort of going on within industry, and the linkages involved with common size and the like, it really does sort of sort itself out.
All right, thanks, Geoff. So a question around some studs report accuracies. What does this mean? Yep,
and it's scary. I might just go on. I've actually got a couple of slides on that, Ian. I'll just go down to it. Sorry, we do have, just on the accuracy values, basically they're an indication of the amount of information that's gone in behind calculating that ASBV. So they use things like individual performance, so the animal's own performance, relatives' performance, so siblings, brothers, sisters, their mother, their fathers, their performance, take into account the correlations that I sort of briefly touched on, and heritability of the trait that you're looking at, and the number of relevant records. So the more records they have, the higher the accuracy level is going to be. Basically, if you see a value below 50%, that's considered as, for accuracy, that's considered as being low to moderately accurate. If you have a value of up to 90% or greater, that's a very high accuracy in terms of the amount of data that's gone in behind generating that ASBV. The higher the accuracy, the smaller the range in variation from the predicted outcomes. And it's a little bit unnerving. If you see on a lot of pen cards, there'll be accuracies of 66% and that sort of thing. You think, well, that's not that high. It's actually quite good. It's actually quite good. But as I said, the more, or the higher the value, the more data has gone in behind that, and the closer that you're likely to get to the outcome from that particular trait.
Thanks, Geoff. Another question's coming. DNA testing can now show where your merinos sit in Australia. Is this going to assist in picking your rams with ASBVs?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I haven't anything to do with the DNA testing side. It's certainly come a long way in the last 5 years, and the price has come down, which is great. The more we can get in and information behind, and DNA testing really puts that accuracy up for your ASBV trait values. The more we can use that sort of thing. But again, the rams are only half of a lamb's genetics. DNA testing, genotype and the like of the U base, is a lot of people are looking into that to see where they stand nationally. And I guess, yeah, if it's not prohibitive cost, the use of that sort of thing to really increase where you stand in terms nationally, I think is a plus.
Okay, thanks, Geoff. So a question here: if you are wanting to find a new ram source that uses ASBVs, what questions should you ask about the data they collect.
Yeah, okay. I might just quickly say, obviously there's a fair few merino studs that, or any of the studs actually that still aren't doing in Land Plan or Merino Select or the Dooney, or all Doonies are actually, but the estimate is, speaking to Sheep Genetics Australia, the estimate is that about 90% of all semen sales in merinos in Australia are from animals that are in the database, in the Merino Select database. So through default, we're seeing a lot of these positives and improvements on the genetic side filtering through all studs in Australia. So that's one thing. So I don't begrudge people staying with a stud if they're happy with them. If that stud is not in the Merino Select program or Land Plan program, but they're performing well and fine, again, ASBVs are just a good little tool that you can use to actually go and select animals on that little bit of extra genetic information. In terms of asking a stud, I'd look at where they stand, look at their sale catalogue, see where the majority of the rams stand in terms of their position in the percentile tables. And I guess accuracies are important. One thing I guess that's a stumbling block for a lot of studs that may want to get into Land Plan or Merino Select programs is, if they're starting out now and the data's only just going in now, it's going to take a while before they really do sort of come high up in terms of where they stand against other studs, because they just haven't got the background data in the system. So, but yeah, look, if you go to a new stud, go armed with, okay, this is my breeding objective. I want to put most emphasis on fleece weight, but I want to ensure that we're going to have some good growth rate, fat and eye muscle. And through the process, I sort of showed you there with looking at indexes and the like, and knowing your breeding objective, you could then start to pinpoint what sort of values you need to look at when you're buying a ram, and then select from that stud rams that are close to those values as possible.
Okay, thanks, Geoff. Another question. What's your opinion on the value of getting average U ASBVs? A quick test of 20 years from a mob.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think you're talking about genetic profiling, spot profiling.
Yeah. Again, I haven't had anything to do with it. I've had clients that have been involved with it. They're quite happy with it. There's a little bit of work involved with getting samples, blood samples, and getting those tested. But again, it gives you a bit of an idea where you stand in industry on the U side.
All right, thanks, Geoff. Any more questions from our attendees? Just quickly put them up there. In the meantime, I'll just thank Geoff for sharing his knowledge and insight into this topic. So just like to thank you again, Geoff, and thank you for everyone that tuned in tonight. And please fill out the poll and have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone.